Memphis, Tennessee, December 1851. On a rain-drenched auction platform near the Mississippi River, an event unfolded that would haunt the city's commercial aristocracy for generations. A single enslaved man, young, striking, and so physically extraordinary that he violated every expectation of trade, was sold for a sum so impossibly high it ignited a chain of consequences no one in Memphis could have foreseen. Within 6 months, 3 of the city's wealthiest dynasties would be ruined. Within a year, the buyer himself would vanish without leaving so much as a trace, except for a handful of cryptic diary entries hinting that he had uncovered something far more dangerous than a questionable business deal. Newspaper archives from that winter contained baffling gaps, entire stretches of missing issues, as if someone had methodically erased every record of what truly happened. What made this young enslaved man so valuable that prominent men were willing to wager their fortunes, reputations, and perhaps even their lives to possess him? What secrets lay buried in this sale? Secrets influential families were determined to remove from the historical record. Before we continue with the tale that would later be whispered about as the Memphis Enigma, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit the notification bell, because the truth you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about the antebellum South. And drop a comment telling us which state or city you're watching from. We love hearing from our community across America. The truth behind this mystery doesn't begin with the auction itself, but with the strange circumstances that delivered this young man to Memphis in the first place. The spring of 1851 found the city in a fever of economic ambition. Memphis had just surpassed Louisville in cotton exports, and its position along the Mississippi made it the throbbing artery of the slave market throughout the Western territories. Auction houses crowded along Front Street like marble temples to prosperity. White pillars glowing under the southern sun, their cavernous interiors echoing with shouted bids, rustling ledgers, and the shuffling of human beings being appraised like livestock. 3 families towered above the rest of Memphis's elite. The Haraway family controlled the largest cotton depots along the riverfront. Edmund Haraway, its patriarch and a former Virginia blue blood, had built his wealth through a combination of shrewd marriages and ruthlessly calculated business maneuvers that left many rivals bankrupt. His eldest son, Charles, served as the polished public face of the dynasty, a handsome man of 32 who wore his privilege as naturally as a tailored coat, every movement a subtle reminder of his superiority. The Dalton family, by contrast, had clawed its way upward from humble beginnings. Jacob Dalton had arrived in Memphis 15 years earlier with nothing but a talent for numbers and an iron determination. Over time, he became the city's most successful slave broker, the man planners contacted when they needed a very specific type of laborer, and whose talent for secrecy made him indispensable to wealthy clients who preferred their more questionable transactions to remain absent from public ledgers. The third clan, the Cavendish family, represented the old wealth of Charleston. Richard Cavendish had moved to Memphis in 1847, bringing not only vast capital but also deep connections to New Orleans shipping moguls and New York financiers. His wife, Victoria, hosted the most exclusive salons in the city, gatherings where business alliances were sealed behind velvet curtains while rare imported wines flowed into crystal glasses. These 3 families coexisted in a delicate state of polite rivalry. Smiles concealed ambition. Compliments were edged with strategy. Beneath their polished interactions, competition simmered. Each family hunted for the investment or acquisition that would elevate them above the others. It was into this atmosphere of tension and aspiration that strange whispers began circulating in early November 1851. A trader named Ambrose Fletcher, known for his dealings throughout the Carolinas and Georgia, had arrived in Memphis with a highly unusual captive. Fletcher was not well liked within the trade. He avoided partnerships, conducted private dealings instead of working with established auction houses, and had a reputation for supplying what merchants discreetly called specialty stock, enslaved individuals with rare skills or tributes prized only by very particular buyers. He rented modest rooms at a boarding house on Madison Avenue, far from the luxurious hotels where visiting traders normally stayed. He advertised nothing. He made no appearances at the public auctions. He spoke to no one about the person he had brought with him, and that silence became its own kind of rumor. In a profession driven by spectacle and bidding wars, secrecy suggested something extraordinary. Whispers spread through Memphis's gentlemen's clubs that Fletcher's captive was a remarkable appearance, not merely handsome, but possessing a beauty so unsettling, so impossible, that grown men stuttered when attempting to describe him. Soon the story sounded almost mythical. Tales of features chiseled like sculpture, eyes holding a sharp, unnatural intelligence, a posture that conveyed dignity rather than enslavement. Charles Haraway first heard of Fletcher's acquisition during a card game at the Memphis Society Club. It was mentioned by a tobacco merchant, William Drexler, who claimed to have glimpsed the young man by accident. Drexler described walking past Fletcher, an enslaved man near the riverfront, and being so stunned by the man's appearance that he had stopped abruptly, causing the person behind him to crash into his back. "I've been in this business 20 years, Drexler had whispered. "I've seen thousands, tens of thousands. Nothing prepared me for what I saw that afternoon. It wasn't just a face, Haraway. It was something else. Something in the way he moved, the way he held himself, even in chains, like he knew something the rest of us didn't." Charles dismissed the account as drunken embellishment, just another tall tale men conjured after too much whiskey, but the description lingered in his mind. His father had recently complained that none of their household staff possessed a refinement befitting their social position. An enslaved man of exceptional appearance, properly trained, could serve as a kind of living ornament in the Haraway household, a source of fascination at dinner parties, a visible reminder of their wealth and influence. Charles began asking questions. He learned Fletcher was preparing to leave Memphis within days, claiming it found no buyer for his unusual captive. The asking price, $3,000, was astonishing. A prime field hand. A strong field hand rarely sold for more than $1,500. An educated house servant might reach $2,000, but $3,000? That hinted at either outright madness or something truly extraordinary. So on a cold, overcast afternoon in late November, Charles Haraway arranged a private viewing. Fletcher received him in his rented room at the boarding house, a narrow, dim space thick with the smell of lamp oil and river moisture. The trader himself was a wiry man in his 50s, his leathered skin bearing the harsh signatures of decades spent on rough roads. His sharp eyes carried a watchfulness that Charles found instantly unpleasant. "I value discretion, Mr. Haraway," Fletcher said, motioning to a rickety chair. "Your inquiry came through the right channels. A promising sign." "I'm told you have something unusual," Charles replied, keep his tone even despite the curiosity stirring in his chest. "I'm here to determine whether the rumors match your asking price." Fletcher allowed a faint, brittle smile, one that never reached his eyes. "The price is firm. Let's be clear on that. What I possess is singular. I do not haggle, nor do I entertain promises of future payment. $3,000 in gold or a bank draft. Nothing else." "Then perhaps," Charles said coolly, "you should show me what warrants such confidence." Fletcher crossed the room to a narrow adjoining door and rapped 3 times. After a pause, the door opened, and the slave who would alter the course of Charles Haraway's life stepped inside. The young man stood around 6 feet tall, his frame lean but perfectly balanced. His skin held a warm golden amber tone, suggesting mixed ancestry. Not unusual in the trade, yet the particular combination of features here created an effect Charles had never witnessed in any auction hall. The face possessed a symmetry almost architectural in precision, high sculpted cheekbones, a defined jawline, and eyes of a shifting gray-green that seemed to change shade under the lamplight. But it was not only his beauty. The young man moved with a quiet, fluid control, something more like the grace of someone trained, educated, shaped by refinement rather than brutality. He wore simple clothing, cotton trousers and a plain white shirt, both clean though clearly worn. There were no shackles on his wrists, no iron at his ankles. Charles noted that immediately. The young man stood with hands lightly clasped before him, gaze lowered in the expected posture of submission. Yet something in his presence suggested the submission was intentional, calculated, an act rather than instinct. "His name is Marcus," Fletcher said softly. 23, born in Virginia. Educated in ways I'm not at liberty to detail. He reads and writes in English and French. Trained in household administration, bookkeeping, and music. Never worked the fields, never subjected to harsh labor. No scars. Completely sound. Charles walked a slow circle around him, examining him with the same discerning eye he reserved for fine sculpture. Marcus didn't move, didn't shift, didn't flinch. But Charles could feel it, an almost electric awareness radiating from him, as if every sense Marcus possessed tracked his movements. "Show me your hands," Charles said. Marcus raised them, palms upward, long, elegant fingers. No calluses, nails neatly kept. These were not the hands of a laborer. These were the hands of someone accustomed to delicate instruments, perhaps a pen, perhaps a violin bow, perhaps parchment. "Look at me," Charles commanded. Marcus lifted his eyes, and something inside Charles jolted. It wasn't merely intelligence he saw in those shifting gray-green irises. It was something layered beneath it. Calculation, perhaps, fatigue, or a knowledge he couldn't name. For an instant, Charles felt an unnerving sensation that Marcus was studying him, not the other way around. "Why hasn't he sold?" Charles asked abruptly, tearing his gaze away. "If he's everything you claim, why are you still here?" Someone should have bought him on the spot. A shadow flickered across Fletcher's face. "The men of this city have no imagination," he said. "They look at a handsome young man and assume he's been kept for improper purposes. They assume he's compromised. They're wrong, but their small-mindedness is your advantage. You have the opportunity they were too blind to recognize." "What about his background?" "I need to know exactly what I'm purchasing." "His history is layered," Fletcher replied. "He was raised in a household that favored education, worked for years as a personal secretary. The family encountered financial ruin. All assets were sold. I obtained him properly, with full documentation. Everything legal, everything transferable." Something in Fletcher's tone hinted that additional details were being carefully withheld. Charles considered pressing further, but his mind was already racing. The Dalton family had recently purchased twin house servants who appeared as exotic amusements at their lavish dinners. The Cavendish family showcased a slave who played piano during their exclusive salons. But this was something far beyond novelty. A male slave of such extraordinary refinement and striking appearance would make Charles the centerpiece of Memphis society. "I'll need documentation," Charles said. "Proof of ownership, transfer papers, everything in order." "Naturally," Fletcher replied, "all prepared. The only question is whether you are prepared to pay my price." Charles looked at Marcus once more. The young man's gaze had returned to the floor, his expression unchanged, but Charles sensed a coiled tension in him, like a tightened spring waiting for release. What thoughts stirred behind those shifting eyes? What opinions did he harbor about being inspected like an animal? It surprised Charles that he even wondered. He had bought and sold dozens over the years, and had never paused to consider their inner worlds. 3,000, Charles said at last. "I'll bring the draft. We'll finalize tomorrow at my attorney's office." Fletcher nodded, satisfaction slipping into his expression. "Tomorrow at 2, bring the draft. I'll bring the papers. Mr. Haraway, you've made an excellent choice. Marcus will serve you exceptionally well." As Charles stepped out into the gray November air, he felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and unease twist in his gut. He had just made the largest purchase of his life, without consulting his father. Edmund Haraway would be furious, no doubt. But once he saw Marcus, once he understood the prestige his acquisition would give their family, that fury would surely shift into approval. Charles felt certain of it. What he could not possibly imagine as he walked through the dimming Memphis streets that evening was that he had just set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately ruin not only his own family, but two others as well. The enslaved man he had agreed to purchase carried a mystery far more perilous than extraordinary beauty. The transfer of ownership unfolded exactly as planned. Charles arrived at his attorney's office with a bank draft for $3,000, issued through the Memphis Trust Bank. Fletcher produced documents that, at first glance, appeared impeccably legitimate: a bill of sale from a Virginia estate, transfer papers proving Fletcher's acquisition, and a testimonial letter detailing Marcus's education and character, signed by a woman listed as Mrs. Eleanor Stratton of Richmond. The attorney, a meticulous man named Horace Pembroke, reviewed everything with the sharp eye of someone who had managed Harrington family dealings for over a decade. Pembroke prided himself on identifying inconsistencies in slave transactions, yet even he seemed faintly unsettled by the intensity with which Fletcher scrutinized each step of the process. "Everything appears to be in order," Pembroke said at last. "The provenance is clear and the documentation is legally sufficient. Mr. Haraway, once you sign here, Marcus becomes your lawful property." Charles signed without hesitation. Fletcher signed opposite him. The bank draft and papers exchanged hands. Marcus, who had stood motionless the entire time, betrayed no reaction, no flicker of relief, fear, or curiosity. His expression remained serenely neutral, his eyes fixed somewhere just beyond the room, his breathing even and controlled. "One piece of advice," Fletcher said as he reached for the door. "Marcus requires particular handling. He isn't like the others. If you mistreat him, he will be difficult. But if you grant him a measure of respect, not equality, of course, but acknowledgement of what he's capable of, he'll surpass your highest expectations." "I know how to manage my property," Charles answered, a faint stiffness in his tone. "Of course," Fletcher said with a curt tip of his hat. Then he stepped out, boarded a riverboat to New Orleans, and vanished. In the months that followed, every attempt to contact him failed. Ambrose Fletcher, it seemed, had disappeared from the slave trade entirely, as if he had never existed in the first place. That evening, Charles brought Marcus to the Haraway estate. The family home, situated along Union Avenue, was an imposing Greek Revival structure supported by 6 towering white columns beneath a vast portico. The mansion's very design projected intimidation, wealth, and unspoken hierarchy. Inside, every room reflected Edmund Haraway's taste for grandeur: imported carpets, French crystal chandeliers, polished woods fashioned by master craftsmen from Philadelphia. Edmund's reaction to Marcus surpassed even Charles's expectations. Prepared to berate his son for such an extravagant, unilateral purchase, Edmund instead fell silent the moment Marcus entered the parlor. The elder Haraway circled him slowly, just as Charles had done the day before, his expression shifting from annoyance to fascination, and then to something bordering on unease. "Remarkable," Edmund murmured. "Charles, you may have shown sense for the first time in your life. I've never seen anything quite like this." Charles felt himself swell with pride. "I thought he could work as your personal secretary, organize your correspondence, manage your appointments, assist at dinners. Imagine the impression he'll make on our guests." "Indeed." Edmund turned toward Marcus. "Can you read complex documents? Legal contracts? Financial ledgers?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. His voice was refined, unexpectedly resonant. "I've worked extensively with such materials in previous service." "Excellent. We'll test that tomorrow. Charles, place him in the East Wing, the room next to my study. I want him close at hand." This decision sent murmurs through the household staff. The Haraways employed 16 enslaved workers, kitchen staff, gardeners, field hands of their rural acreage, house servants, and a coachman. All of them lived either in the basement level or in the detached quarters behind the property. To give Marcus a room in the East Wing, mere steps from Edmund's private study and down the hall from Charles's own chambers, implied a status unlike anything any enslaved person in the household had ever been granted. Bess, the head housekeeper, a stern woman who had served the family for 2 decades, voiced her concerns to Charles that same night. "It isn't proper," she said bluntly, "putting him up there among the family. The others are whispering already. They don't know what to make of him." "He isn't like the others," Charles replied. "He's educated, refined. Father wants him close for business matters." Bess shook her head but said nothing more. She had long understood that questioning the Harrowways' decisions only led to trouble. Marcus adjusted to the household astonishingly quickly. Within days, he had mastered Edmund's daily schedule, reorganized years of neglected correspondence, and demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate needs before they were spoken aloud. He moved through the mansion with quiet precision, always within reach when required, yet never imposing his presence where it wasn't invited. At dinner parties, he served with such elegance that other servants seemed clumsy beside him. Guests invariably remarked on his appearance. "Where did you find him?" Sarah Dalton asked 2 weeks after Marcus's arrival, unable to keep her gaze from drifting toward him. "He's absolutely mesmerizing." "A fortunate acquisition," Edmund responded, clearly pleased. "One must know where to look for quality." Across the table, Victoria Cavendish observed Marcus with narrowed, discerning eyes. "He seems almost too polished for bondage," she said. "With proper attire, one might mistake him for a gentleman." "Appearances can be cultivated," Edmund replied smoothly. "Training and education can work wonders on suitable material." But privately, Edmund found himself wrestling with the very same thought. Marcus's refinement didn't feel learned. It felt intrinsic, woven into him. His movements, the cadence of his speech, even the way he held a book when reading, all suggested someone raised in privilege, not someone conditioned to impersonate it. Where had Fletcher truly obtained him? And who exactly was this supposed Mrs. Eleanor Stratton of Richmond? And why would someone of such apparent status ever own a slave like Marcus? Edmund began making discreet inquiries. He wrote to longtime contacts in Richmond, asking about the Stratton family and whether any large estates in the region had recently liquidated enslaved servants. When the answers arrived weeks later, they only deepened the strangeness. No one had ever heard of a Mrs. Eleanor Stratton. The signature on Marcus's documents appeared genuine, the handwriting consistent across multiple papers. Yet the woman herself did not exist in any Richmond registry, social directory, or state ledger. It was as though someone had invented her specifically to legitimize Marcus's sale. Meanwhile, Charles found himself increasingly preoccupied with Marcus in ways that unsettled him. It wasn't only the young man's striking appearance, though his beauty remained disarming no matter how many times Charles saw him. It was the intelligence behind those shifting gray-green eyes, the sense that Marcus perceived far more than he allowed others to see. Charles kept inventing excuses to speak to him, asking questions Marcus answered with careful, measured vagueness. "Where did you learn French?" Charles asked one afternoon after finding Marcus reading a French novel in his room. "My previous employer valued languages," Marcus replied calmly. "I was taught in childhood." "That's unusual. Most slaveholders don't waste resources on educating their properties so deeply." "My situation was unusual," Marcus said. For a brief second something crossed his face, pain, anger, or memory, before he smoothed it away with practiced neutrality. "In what way?" A pause hung in the air. "Perhaps it is best left in the past, Mr. Harroway." But Charles could not leave it in the past. He found his thoughts drifting to Marcus at odd hours, wondering what kind of life had shaped such a man, what fragment of privilege or freedom he might have once known, and what had torn him away from it. These questions felt dangerous, suggesting humanity Charles had been raised to ignore and enslave people. The other slaves in the household kept their distance. They recognized Marcus's elevated status, but sensed something unsettling about him as well. Bess, the head housekeeper, confided to the cook that Marcus made her uneasy. "He watches everything," Bess whispered. "Sees everything. Doesn't say much, but you can tell he's thinking. And sometimes I catch the way he looks at Mr. Edmund or Mr. Charles. There's something in his eyes. Not fear, that's for sure, The cook, Judith, nodded gravely. That man's hiding something. Mark me, he's got secrets. Secrets we probably don't want to know. They were more right than they understood. On a cold evening in early January 1852, about 6 weeks after Marcus's arrival, Jacob Dalton made an unexpected visit to the Haraway estate. His carriage rolled up to the massive front portico just as the family finished dinner. Edmund greeted him in the study, puzzled by such an unannounced call. Dalton, a stout man with ruddy face and fever-bright eyes, entered in a near-agitated state. He refused brandy, dismissed small talk, and went straight to his purpose. "I want to buy your new slave," Dalton announced flatly. "The young one, Marcus. Name your price." Edmund blinked. "He's not for sale, Jacob. I only just acquired him. I'll give you $5,000. That's nearly double what I paid." "How do you even know what I paid?" Dalton brushed the question aside. "I make it my business to know such things." "5,000, Edmund. Think about it. That's an extraordinary profit for 6 weeks." "The answer is no," Edmund replied. "Marcus has already proved invaluable to my operations. He's worth far more to me than 5,000. Dalton's face reddened. 6,000. That's my final offer." "Jacob," Edmund said, incredulous, "even if I were willing to sell, which I'm not, why would you pay such an absurd amount? What use could he possibly serve that would justify such a sum?" Dalton stared at him silently for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost conspiratorial. "You don't understand what you have in your house, do you? You think he's merely an unusually handsome servant with a bit of education. But there's something else about him. Something that could be very valuable under the right circumstances." "What are you talking about?" "I've made inquiries about the man who sold him to you, Ambrose Fletcher. Do you know what Fletcher specialized in, Edmund? He didn't deal in field laborers or even refined house servants. He dealt in slaves with specific qualities, sold to very specific buyers. Private collectors, you might call them. People willing to pay enormous sums for merchandise that defies ordinary classification." A cold tremor ran through Edmund. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Dalton said. "I'm stating facts. Fletcher left Memphis immediately after the sale. No forwarding address. No record of where he went. That alone is suspicious. And the documents he gave you, have you truly verified them? Actually traced them back to their origin? My attorney examined everything. Papers can be forged. Signatures copied. I'd wager that if you dig deeper, you'll find inconsistencies, gaps, contradictions, questions without answers." Edmund felt his unease building. "Even if what you say were true, it doesn't explain your interest in buying Marcus. What do you know that I don't?" Dalton leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago, Richard Cavendish approached me with a proposal. He wanted to know if I could arrange to steal Marcus from your home. He offered me $2,000 just to facilitate the theft, with another $3,000 once the slave was delivered to him. I refused, of course. I'm a businessman, not a thief. But it tells you something, doesn't it? About how valuable Cavendish believes that young man is. Edmund stared at him, stunned. But why would Richard want him so badly? That's what I've been trying to discover, Dalton said. I've asked questions through my network. And what I found, Edmund, is troubling. Very troubling. It suggests that Marcus may not be who Fletcher claimed he was. Explain. Dalton hesitated only a moment before continuing. There are rumors, only whispers, nothing confirmed, that a prominent family in Virginia lost a son about 2 years ago. The young man vanished under mysterious circumstances. The family claimed he ran away, but there were irregularities in their story. The young man was educated, refined, and known for his striking appearance. The family refused to discuss the matter, refused all inquiries, even from reporters. And here is what makes it truly fascinating. The family's name was Thornton. Eleanor Thornton was the mother, not Stratton. Thornton, The similarities struck Edmund instantly. Just a few letters changed. Exactly, Dalton said. Now, I can't prove Marcus is the missing Thornton son. I can't even prove such a son was officially registered. The family has been extremely effective at suppressing information. But if he were Edmund, if Marcus is actually a free-born man illegally enslaved, do you understand the implications? Edmund understood too well. It would mean Marcus's enslavement was not just unlawful, but a criminal act. That Fletcher had trafficked a free man, and that Edmund, unknowingly, had become complicit. The legal consequences would be catastrophic, the social ruin even worse. The Haraway name would not survive such a scandal. This is speculation, Edmund said firmly, though his voice faltered. You have no proof. I have enough, Dalton replied, to make both Richard Cavendish and myself willing to pay extraordinary sums. Enough to drag me out here on this freezing night, to make you an offer. Think about it, $6,000. Take the money, Edmund. Let me handle whatever complications arise. You wash your hands of the matter. Edmund studied him closely. Dalton was a master negotiator, skilled in reading people, exploiting their doubts. Was this elaborate story simply leveraged to obtain Marcus at a discount? Or was there truth in these whispers of the Thornton family? I need time, Edmund said at last. 3 days. I want to investigate your claims. If I find evidence supporting them, we'll discuss terms. Dalton rose, clearly displeased but aware he had reached the limit of persuasion. 3 days, Edmund. But I warn you, Cavendish won't wait. If he can't buy Marcus legally, he may try alternative methods. When Dalton left, Edmund remained in the study, staring into fire for a long while, his mind spiraling through possibilities, each worse than the last. Finally, he rang for Marcus. The young man appeared within minutes, composed as always. You wish to see me, sir? Edmund examined him with new eyes now, searching for any hint of deception, any sign of hidden identity. Marcus stood calmly under the scrutiny, neither servile nor confrontational, simply present, waiting. Tell me the truth, Edmund said quietly. Who are you really? Not the story Fletcher gave me. The truth. Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Surprise, perhaps even relief, before he masked it again with his practiced composure. What truth would you like to hear, Mr. Haraway? Marcus asked softly. The truth of who I was, or the truth of what I've become? Both. Marcus remained silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a gravity Edmund had never heard from him. I was born free in Virginia. That much of Fletcher's papers is accurate. I was educated according to my family's means. I had a future, prospects, and then circumstances shifted in ways I could not control. I found myself in a situation no amount of learning or refinement could save me from. Fletcher purchased me from people who had no legal right to sell me. He knew it. He didn't care. He saw profit, nothing else. The Thornton family, Edmund said quietly. Marcus's eyes widened just slightly. You've been asking questions. Jacob Dalton was here. He told me things. Are you Eleanor Thornton's son? I was. The simple past tense struck Edmund like a blow. He realized suddenly he had paid $3,000 for a freeborn man. He had, without meaning to, enslave someone unlawfully. His entire family's reputation, everything they had built, could collapse. Why didn't you say anything? Edmund demanded, anger rising not entirely at Marcus, but at himself. Why didn't you protest when Fletcher sold you? Why stay silent at my attorney's office? Marcus's expression hardened. And say what, Mr. Haraway? Who would have believed me? A man in chains claiming to be freeborn? Fletcher had papers, signatures, everything appearing legitimate. I had nothing but my word. Would your attorney have trusted me over Fletcher's documents? Would you have? Edmund could find no answer. The truth was obvious. The law would have accepted forged documentation over the word of an enslaved man every single time. If you're freeborn, Edmund said slowly, then you have rights. I should arrange your release, return you to your family. My family, Marcus said bitterly, is the reason I'm here. Do you imagine I was snatched from the street like some unfortunate victim? My own mother sold me, Mr. Harroway. She created the false documentation. She arranged the sale to Fletcher. The Thornton name meant more to her than her own son. So forgive me if I do not share your enthusiasm for returning home. Edmund was stunned. He had heard of such cases. Wealthy families selling their mixed-race children and forging histories to erase the shame of debt, but always as distant, whispered rumors, never as something real standing in his own parlor. Why are you telling me this now? Edmund asked. Because Dalton was right to warn you about Cavendish, Marcus replied. Richard Cavendish knows who I am. He knows what my existence represents. And he wants me not as a servant, but as leverage against my family. Leverage. The Thorntons may have cast me out, but they still fear exposure. Cavendish has been attempting to blackmail them for months. If he acquires me, he'll use me to bleed the Thornton fortune dry. And then when he's satisfied, he'll expose them anyway. He'd destroy them simply because he finds pleasure in it. Edmund's head spun. How do you know this? Marcus's reply was calm, but edged with something sharp. Because I am not deaf, Mr. Harroway. I hear conversations in this house. I observe who comes and goes from this house. I've pieced together what I can from fragments, whispers in corridors, snatches of conversation. Cavendish has been preparing this for months. Dalton's offer tonight wasn't generosity. It was an attempt to outmaneuver Cavendish before he made his own move. Then what should I do? Edmund asked quietly. Marcus gave a faint smile, one without warmth. That depends on what kind of man you are. You could sell me to Dalton and take the profit. You could sell me to Cavendish and take even more, though with that choice comes a heavier stain on your conscience. Or, he paused, letting the weight settle between them. You could do something neither man expects. You could help me disappear. The suggestion hung like smoke between them. Edmund stared at Marcus, saw not a slave, but a young man ensnared in forces larger than himself, yet still fighting with what little agency he had left. If I help you, Edmund said slowly, I'll make enemies of both Dalton and Cavendish. They won't forgive what they'll see as betrayal. No, they won't, Marcus agreed. But if you sell me to either of them, you'll never sleep easily again. The truth always finds its way to daylight. When it does, you'll be tied to a scandal that will destroy your family just as surely as it would destroy me. But if I vanish, you can claim ignorance. Say I escaped. Say Fletcher misled you, as he misled everyone. Edmund weighed the impossible choices before him. Each path carried danger. Each direction carried consequences he could not fully predict. But Marcus was right. Truth had a way of rising, no matter how deep the burial. Finally, Edmund spoke. 3 days. That's what I told Dalton. In 3 days, you'll leave. I'll provide money, papers, enough to help you reach the north. In return, you'll never contact me again. You'll never speak of this household. Never reveal anything you've learned here. Agreed. And Marcus, if that's even your true name. It is, Marcus said calmly. Marcus Thornton. Whatever else was taken from me, my name wasn't. Very well. Marcus, if you ever betray this trust, if you turn what you know against me, I will use every resource I have to find you. Do we understand each other? Perfectly. They shook hands, master and enslaved man, forming an agreement that defied every rule of their world. Edmund felt the strength of Marcus's grip, an equal force meeting his own, and he understood that, for the first time since Marcus entered his home, neither of them was lying. But neither man could imagine how the choice they had just made would spiral, not into Marcus's disappearance, but into something far more catastrophic. There were others watching, others planning, and in Memphis in 1852, secrets did not stay buried for long. The next morning, Charles Haraway noticed an immediate change in his father. Edmund was restless during breakfast, barely eating, glancing repeatedly toward the hall as if expecting someone or something to interrupt them. When Charles asked if anything was wrong, Edmund muttered something vague about business and dismissed the question. Marcus served the table with his usual quiet precision. To Charles, nothing in the young man's demeanor seemed different, yet some tremor in the room, a tension just beneath the surface, suggested that something had shifted. After the meal, Edmund summoned Charles into his study and shut the door, an unusual precaution inside their own home. "What do you know about Richard Cavendich's financial state?" Edmund asked abruptly. Charles blinked. "The Cavendich family? They're wealthy, old Charleston money, shipping interests, political ties." "Why? Has Richard approached you recently? Offered anything? Ask questions." "No, father. What is this about?" Edmund paced to the window, his expression taut. "Last night, Jacob Dalton came here with an outrageous offer, $6,000 for Marcus. When I declined, he told me Richard Cavendich had approached him about stealing Marcus. Offered $5,000 in total for the theft." Charles felt a sick twist in his stomach. Steal him? Why would Richard want him that desperately? "That's what we must uncover. I need you to inquire discreetly. Learn what you can about Cavendich, his dealings, his associates, any signs of financial strain or hidden motives. Can you do that?" "Of course," Charles said. "But shouldn't we tell Marcus? If someone means to abduct him, he has a right to know." Edmund turned from the window, his face unreadable. "Marcus knows more than enough already. Just gather the information. Time is against us." Charles left the study more confused than ever. His father's unusual secrecy, the urgency in his voice, the mention of a looming deadline, none of it aligned with anything Charles understood. He spent the day quietly questioning acquaintances, listening more than speaking, piecing together fragments about Richard Cavendich's recent habits. The picture that emerged was unsettling. Cavendich had been spending beyond his means for nearly a year. He purchased property in New Orleans, invested heavily in a steamboat line that failed spectacularly, gambled at the Memphis club with wagers that suggested either enormous wealth or dire desperation. His wife, Victoria, had abruptly ended her celebrated salons, officially for health reasons, but gossip pointed toward financial humiliation. More troubling still, Cavendich had made repeated trips between Memphis and Virginia over the past several months. Their purpose was unknown, but one acquaintance recalled seeing him in Richmond in late November, exactly when Marcus had arrived. That evening, Charles relayed everything to his father. Edmund listened in silence, nodding slowly as if fitting pieces into a puzzle only he could see. "Richmond? In November," Edmund murmured. "That is interesting. Why? What does it mean?" "It means," Edmund said carefully, "that Cavendich may have known of Marcus long before I purchased him. He may have gone to Virginia to learn about the Thornton family, about Marcus's past." Charles stared. "What Thornton family?" "Father, none of this makes sense." Edmund hesitated, clearly wrestling with a decision, weighing how much of the truth he was willing to expose. At last, Edmund said quietly, "Marcus isn't who Fletcher claimed. His true name is Marcus Thornton, born free in Virginia, illegally enslaved by his own family to cover their debts, then funneled through Fletcher and sold to me. If that came to light, it would trigger a scandal capable of destroying several families, including ours." Charles sank into a chair as if the weight of the revelation had crushed the air from his lungs. "How long have you known?" "Since last night," Edmund said. "He told me after Dalton left. And now Cavendish is circling like a vulture, trying to acquire Marcus, not for service, but for blackmail, extortion, God knows what else. What are we going to do? I've made arrangements with Marcus. In 2 days, he'll vanish. We'll claim he ran away. Dalton and Cavendish lose their leverage, and we walk away from all of this." Charles should have felt relief. Instead, An unexpected heaviness pressed on him. Despite the turmoil Marcus had introduced into their lives, Charles had grown accustomed to him. More than accustomed. He found himself anticipating their small conversations, the flickers of authenticity behind Marcus's careful mask. Does Marcus want to disappear? Charles asked softly. Edmund shot him a sharp look. What he wants is irrelevant. This is the only path that protects everyone involved. It protects us. I'm not sure it protects him, Charles murmured. Where will he go? How does a man travel the country as a fugitive slave? If he's caught, he won't be caught. I'm giving him money and documentation. He's resourceful enough to make his way north. Now stop questioning my decision and focus on ensuring the next 2 days pass without interference. But interference was exactly what the next 2 days delivered, because while Edmund and Charles planned Marcus's escape, Richard Cavendish had begun executing the plan he had been crafting for months, a plan that would soon ignite the most shocking violence Memphis had seen in years. That night, flames erupted in the Cavendish family warehouse by the river. The inferno devoured the structure entirely, consuming nearly $50,000 worth of goods. Richard was inside when the fire began, desperately trying to save his account books. He barely escaped, suffering burns to his hands and face. The fire was declared accidental, a lamp overturned by carelessness. But those familiar with the Cavendish fortunes whispered different theories. Some insisted Richard had set the blaze for insurance. Others said creditors had sent a warning. The truth was far darker. The fire had been set deliberately, but not by Richard and not for insurance. Someone wanted Richard incapacitated, distracted, unable to act on his plans for Marcus Thornton. Someone who understood that desperate men commit fatal blunders. The following morning, while Cavendish lay bandaged and sedated, 3 events unfolded within hours, events that shattered whatever fragile balance remained. First, Jacob Dalton's eldest son, Thomas, was discovered dead in his room, 24 years old, healthy, with no ailment of note, yet found lifeless in bed. A seizure, perhaps, or apoplexy. Doctors could not agree. No bruising, no sign of poisoning, nothing that explained why a young man's heart would simply stop in the night. Second, Victoria Cavendish arrived unannounced at the Harrington estate, demanding to see Marcus. She was taken to the front parlor, pacing like a trapped predator, all her usual poise stripped away. When Edmund entered, she dispensed with greetings. I know what you're planning, she said coldly. You intend to help him escape. Don't bother denying it. Richard posted watchers around your property. We know about the late-night meetings, the quiet preparations. You think you can whisk him away before we make our move. Mrs. Cavendish, I don't know what you imagine. Don't patronize me, Edmund. I know exactly who Marcus Thornton is. I know what my husband intended to do with him. And I know what you stand to lose if certain information becomes public. So let me simplify this. Give Marcus to me. Right now, I'll pay you $4,000 above what you spent. And in return, the matter disappears. Your husband attempted to have him stolen, Edmund replied. Why should I trust anything coming from your household? Victoria's expression tightened into something colder than anger. Richard's warehouse fire was no accident. Someone wanted to stop him from acting. Someone who understood how much money he could extract from the Thornton family with Marcus's cooperation. Now Richard lies half-blind, his business destroyed. I am the one left to salvage our future. Give me Marcus, and on my family's name, whatever secrets he carries will die with him. The implication curled like smoke between them. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting nothing, she snapped. I am stating reality. Some problems can only be solved permanently. Loose ends must be cut, not tied. Now, will you accept my offer? Before Edmund could answer, Charles burst into the parlor, his face drained of color. Father, you need to come. Immediately. It's Marcus. He's gone. Edmund and Victoria rushed after him through the halls. Marcus's room was immaculate, bed made, no overturned furniture. No signs of struggle. Everything perfectly in place, except for the absence of Marcus himself. When did you last see him? Edmund demanded. Less than an hour ago, Charles said. He served breakfast. Then he went upstairs. I assumed he was in his room, preparing for the day. But when I went to check, he was gone. Had Marcus decided not to wait? Had he overheard Victoria's arrival and fled? Or had something else occurred? Something none of them were prepared for? Victoria's expression shifted from fury to calculation. He can't have gone far. Not in daylight. Not without time to prepare. Search the grounds. Question your other servants. Someone must have seen. Don't tell me what to do in my own house. Edmund snapped. In my own house. Edmund snapped. Then handle yourself. Victoria shot back. That young man represents a fortune to whoever reaches him first. Do you truly want it to be anyone but us? The third revelation of that morning emerged from their frantic questioning of the staff. A stable hand, after being pressed, admitted seeing a carriage arrive at the rear entrance of the estate shortly after dawn. He had assumed it was some early delivery, but now recalled the carriage bore the distinctive blue streak belonging to the Dalton family. Dalton, Edmund whispered, his face draining of color. That bastard didn't wait for my answer. He's taken him. But Edmund was wrong. Jacob Dalton had not taken Marcus. Jacob Dalton, at that exact moment, was preparing his eldest son's funeral arrangements, too consumed by grief to plot anything else. The carriage that arrived at the Harrington estate did belong to the Daltons, but it had been hired by someone else entirely. Someone who had been quietly maneuvering behind every competing interest for weeks. Someone who understood what none of them yet grasped. Marcus's true worth lay not in his appearance nor in blackmail potential, but in knowledge, in what it heard and seen inside the Harrington home, and how those observations could expose a web of interconnected scandals binding three of Memphis's most powerful families. By the time Edmund, Charles, and Victoria realized Marcus had not fled on his own, but had been deliberately taken by someone with plan, he was already 10 miles outside Memphis, heading toward a destination none of them could have imagined. Marcus Thornton's disappearance detonated a chain reaction through elite Memphis society. A scandal so profound would later be spoken of in breathless secrecy as the darkest chapter in the city's antebellum history. But those conclusions would come later. For now, there was only confusion. Edmund Harrington's immediate instinct was to summon the sheriff and report a runaway slave. But Victoria Cavender's icy stare stopped in mid-step. Think, she said. Once the law is involved, everything becomes public record. Questions will be asked about Marcus's past, his purchase, the irregularities in Fletcher's documentation. Is that really what you want? Edmund froze. She was right. Official attention meant official scrutiny, and that scrutiny would expose the illegalities he had unknowingly participated in. This had to be handled quietly. Then what do you suggest? Edmund asked. We pool our resources, Victoria said. Your family, mine, and the Daltons. We all have reasons to want Marcus found. We hire private investigators, slave catchers. If we must, we locate him before anyone else does, and then we resolve the matter. Charles felt a chill at her choice of words. Resolve? How exactly? Victoria turned sharply toward him. However necessary, Mr. Harrington. This is not a moment for delicacy. Over the next 48 hours, a private search was coordinated. Edmund contacted Jacob Dalton, who, despite his grief over Thomas's sudden death, understood the gravity of the situation. Together with Richard Cavendish, burned furious and determined to be involved, they hired a notorious slave hunter named Silas Ketch. Ketch was a man widely known for two things: his near-perfect success rate and his total absence of moral boundaries. Ketch listened closely to their description of Marcus, his interest growing with every detail. When Charles produced a daguerreotype he had commissioned weeks earlier for household records, Ketch examined the portrait with a slow, assessing gaze. Unusual face, he muttered. The sort folk remember. That'll help, assuming he's still close by. But tell me, gentlemen, anything else I should know? Anything that might affect my approach? The three men exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, Cavendish answered, "He is valuable, extremely valuable, worth far more than his purchase price. We need him returned unharmed and discreetly. Any record of his absence must remain absent." Ketch smiled thinly. "Discretion costs extra. And if this boy is as valuable as you imply, I'll need payment guaranteed. 2,000 on delivery." 1,000, Edmund countered, plus expenses. 1,500, Ketch said, "and you have a deal." They agreed. Ketch departed to begin his search, leaving the three families to wait in apprehension. Though even as he rode out, other forces were moving unseen across Memphis. 2 days after Thomas Dalton's mysterious death, another man connected to the Marcus affair died unexpectedly. William Drexler, Richard Cavendish's business partner, and the same man who had first told Charles about Marcus's extraordinary appearance, collapsed during a business luncheon, dead before a doctor could arrive. No warning, no signs of illness. Heart failure, they said, though he had been in perfect health that morning. 2 deaths in 4 days, both of young, healthy men, both with connections to Marcus Thornton. Coincidence, some murmured. Others whispered darker theories. The whispers became shouts when Silas Ketch returned to Memphis a week after beginning his search, haggard, hollow-eyed, looking as if he had not slept in days. He gathered Edmund, Dalton, and Cavendish in the Harrington study and delivered his findings without ceremony. "I found your slave," he said. "Or rather, I found where he was taken." He placed a map on Edmund's desk. "There's an old plantation house about 15 miles northeast, supposedly abandoned when its owner died. Except it's not abandoned. Someone's been using it, watching all of you, and they've been doing it for months. Watching us." Cavendish demanded. "Who?" "That's where things get complicated," Ketch said. "The person who took Marcus is a woman. I didn't catch her name. She'd vanished before I could get close. But I did find documents in the house. Letters, ledgers, lists. Gentlemen, someone has been collecting information about your families. All 3 of yours. Business dealings, personal affairs, illegal transactions, debts, every vulnerability you have." Edmund felt cold, sweat dripped down his spine. "What kind of documents?" he asked quietly. Ketch drew a breath. "Records of illegal slave purchases, falsified land transfers, evidence of bribes to city officials, documentation of business deals that violated federal trade laws. Gentlemen, whoever gathered this information has enough to bring down all 3 of your families at the same time." "Where is Marcus?" Dalton asked, his voice tight with fear. "Gone," Ketch replied. "They cleared out about 2 days before I arrived, but they left this behind, a message addressed to the 3 of you." He withdrew a sealed envelope from his coat. Edmund took it with trembling hands and broke the seal. A single sheet lay inside, covered in elegant handwriting. "Gentlemen, by now you've realized that Marcus Thornton is no longer within your reach. You've also realized your private affairs are no longer private. I possess documentation of crimes sufficient to see all 3 of you imprisoned, your families ruined, and your names erased from polite society. You may wonder why I collected such information. The answer is simple. You were all complicit in what happened to my son, Jacob Dalton. You sold him to Fletcher, knowing the papers were false. You did not care that you were trafficking a freeborn man, because the profit was too tempting. Richard Cavendish, you followed him to Memphis, intending to use him as a tool for blackmail. You planned to extort money from me under threat of revealing the truth, then reveal it anyway to destroy what remained of my reputation. Edmund Harrington, you purchased my son knowing something was wrong. You knew the price was too high, the documentation questionable, but you chose to ignore the danger because you craved the status he represented. Each of you saw a vulnerable young man and saw only opportunity. None of you saw a human being. Now you will answer for that. I could destroy you immediately by sending my evidence to the press or federal authorities. But that would be too quick, too merciful. Instead, I will give you a choice. Within the next 30 days, each of you will receive instructions for making reparations. These reparations will be substantial, financial, social, and personal. If you comply, I will return all documentation, and you will never hear from me again. If you refuse, or if you attempt to harm me or my son, everything becomes public. The choice is yours. Choose wisely. Eleanor Thornton. The silence afterward felt thick enough to choke them. Edmund read the letter twice before he could even form a thought. Marcus's mother, the woman rumored to have sold her own son, had orchestrated everything. She had reclaimed him. She had been watching them for months. She had assembled evidence of crimes each man believed buried forever. It's a bluff, Cavendish said at last, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. She can't possibly have all the evidence she claims. The slave catcher says otherwise, Dalton snapped. He saw the documents. Are you willing to risk your family's entire future on the hope she's lying? What I want to know, Edmund murmured, is how she did all of this. One woman cannot orchestrate such a scheme alone. The warehouse fire, the timing of the deaths, the abduction, it's too coordinated. She had help, Ketch said. There were signs of multiple people using that plantation house, at least 3 or 4, and one of them might have been Marcus himself, if he didn't resist but willingly joined them once he realized his mother had come for him. The implication struck them all like a blow. Marcus had not been a passive victim. He had been acting, observing, collecting information, learning their vulnerabilities. His impeccable service, his quiet obedience, all of it a mask while he fed information to his mother. That clever devil, Edmund muttered, a mix of fury and grudging admiration. He fooled all of us. So what do we do? Charles asked, his voice thin. He had remained silent through most of Ketch's report, his complexion growing paler with each revelation. Do we comply with her demands? Absolutely not, Cavendish barked. We don't negotiate with extortionists. We find her, find Marcus, and silence them both. And how? Edmund countered. She's anticipated every step we've taken. She had an escape plan in motion before Ketch even began looking. She and Marcus may already be out of state. Then we hire people who specialize in solving problems like this, Cavendish insisted. They're expensive, but... And the more people you involve, Edmund said coldly, the more this spirals beyond our control. Every witness becomes a potential threat. The 3 men argue for over an hour. Men who had once considered themselves rivals, now bound together in a fragile alliance born of fear. Eventually, they agreed on a temporary course of action. They would wait for Eleanor Thornton's instructions. They would see what she demanded. They would evaluate whether compliance was possible. But even as they reached this uneasy pact, each man was already devising his own backup plan. Each one was already thinking about self-preservation, even if it meant sacrificing the others. Their alliance was doomed from the moment it formed. Eleanor Thornton had not spent months planning only to accept whatever compliance they offered. What she wanted was not money or apology. She wanted destruction, complete, irreversible, a final, devastating reckoning for the men who had taken her son. Her instructions arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered to each household by an anonymous courier. The letters were identical in structure, but tailored to each man personally. Each one aimed precisely at the specific vulnerabilities of each recipient. Jacob Dalton received his letter first, delivered on a gray morning when grief over Thomas's death still hung over the house like fog. The instructions were uncompromising. He was to write a full confession detailing his participation in the trafficking of Marcus Thornton, admitting he knowingly sold a freeborn man into slavery. This confession had to be notarized and delivered to an address in Nashville within 15 days. Additionally, he was ordered to pay $15,000, The total Eleanor Thornton calculated he had earned from illegal slave transactions over the past 5 years into a fund dedicated to helping formerly enslaved people access education and employment. If he complied, the evidence against him would be destroyed. If he refused, she would forward his ledgers to federal authorities, accompanied by documentation proving at least a dozen illegal slave transactions, any one of which carried a potential prison sentence. Dalton read the letter in his study, hands shaking. The demands were impossible. A written confession would annihilate him even if criminal charges were avoided. His business, his reputation, his standing in Memphis would collapse overnight, and $15,000 represented a massive portion of his available capital. Compliance would ruin him financially and socially. Non-compliance would send him to prison. He sat there for hours, frozen, the letter before him like a death sentence. His wife found him at midday, exactly where she had left him, staring hollow-eyed at nothing. Richard Cavendish's letter was different, but no less catastrophic. He was ordered to sell all remaining business assets at fair market value and use the proceeds to establish a school for children of formerly enslaved people in Memphis. He was to write letters to 3 families he had wronged in business dealings, apologizing and offering financial restitution. And he was to publicly withdraw from every social club or organization that excluded people based on race or prior condition of servitude. Complying would amount to social suicide. Cavendish would become a pariah overnight, his reputation gone, his wife's social status obliterated. When Victoria read the demands, she flew into a rage so violent she hurled a crystal vase in the fireplace, shattering it into glittering shards. "We will not comply," she hissed. "I don't care what evidence she claims to hold. We will not be dictated to by a woman who sold her own son." "She didn't sell him," Richard said quietly. "That's what we misunderstood. She never sold Marcus. Someone else in the family did, likely her husband or another relative trying to hide the scandal. She has been trying to recover him ever since. Then her quarrel is with the one who sold him, not with us." "We participated," Richard replied, rubbing his bandaged hands. "We profited. In her eyes, that makes us just as guilty." Edmund Harrington's demands were perhaps the most devastating in a personal sense. He was instructed to free all 16 enslaved people in his household, provide each with documentation, travel funds, and assistance in establishing new lives as free men and women. He was to publicly admit his role in purchasing Marcus despite knowing the transaction was suspicious, and he was to resign from his positions on the board of 2 Memphis banks, recommending that both institutions adopt policies prohibiting loans secured with slave-based collateral. Charles found his father seated alone in the study late that night, the letter in one hand, tears streaming down his face. Charles had never seen his father cry. "It's over," Edmund whispered. "Everything we built, everything our family stands for. She's asking us to dismantle it piece by piece." "Then we fight," Charles said. "We hire lawyers, investigators. We find her before the 30 days are up." "No," Edmund murmured. "She's too prepared. She's been planning this for months, maybe years. Every move we might make, she has already accounted for." He looked at his son with a shattered expression. "And the worst part, Charles, is that she's right. We did participate in something monstrous. We value property over humanity. We told ourselves it was legal, acceptable, simply business. But that doesn't make it right." Charles felt ice run through him. His father was already accepting Eleanor Thornton's moral framing. He was halfway to compliance, and compliance would destroy them as thoroughly as exposure. "We need to meet," Charles said. "All 3 families. Present a united front." 2 days later, the meeting took place. It was held at the Harrington estate after dark to avoid attention. Jacob Dalton arrived looking gaunt, as if he hadn't slept since receiving his letter. Richard Cavendish appeared slightly more composed, though his wife Victoria's presence made clear she was now directing their family's response. Edmund and Charles represented the Harringtons. The 5 of them gathered in Edmund's study, seated in a ring of chairs around the fireplace like conspirators, which, Charles realized grimly, was exactly what they had become. "We need to find her," Victoria declared. "Whatever it costs, whatever it requires." This ends when Eleanor Thornton and her son are removed as threats. "You're talking about murder," Edmund said flatly. "I'm talking about survival," Victoria replied. "She has given us an impossible choice: destroy ourselves by complying or be destroyed by exposure. I am offering a third path: eliminate her power to destroy us." "And how would you do that?" Dalton demanded. "We don't know where she is. We don't know who is helping her. For all we know, she has already duplicated everything she has and distributed it to people we'll never find. Killing her may accelerate our downfall, not prevent it." "Then we learn everything," Victoria said. "We find someone who can track her, someone who can determine the scope of her preparations, someone capable of handling the situation before we make a move." Charles listened with mounting horror. They were calmly discussing murder, as if it were a business negotiation. He had always known their wealth rested on compromised morality. That was the way of their world. But this was something else entirely. This was planning violence against a woman whose only crime was fighting to reclaim her son. "There is another option," Charles said suddenly, interrupting Victoria's strategy. "We could comply." The other four stared at him as though he had gone mad. "Insane," Victoria demanded. "Compliance destroys us just as surely as exposure." "Maybe that's appropriate," Charles said quietly. "Maybe we deserve to be destroyed." "Charles," Edmund began, but Charles raised a hand. "No, hear me out. Everything Eleanor Thornton accused us of is true. We did help traffic a freeborn man. We did value property over humanity. We did participate in crimes because they benefited us. Maybe the answer isn't to add more violence to the harm already done, but to finally accept responsibility for what we've done." "Noble sentiments," Cavendish said coldly. "But nobility doesn't keep a roof over your head or preserve your name. The real world requires pragmatism, not philosophical hand-wringing." "The real world is changing," Charles countered. "There's increasing pressure against slavery in the North. Federal tensions over the Fugitive Slave Act are worsening. What happens if abolitionists gain power? What happens if slavery itself becomes illegal? All the evidence Eleanor has collected would still be valid, still able to ruin us. Compliance at least ends the threat completely." "Your son makes a valid point," Dalton murmured, exhausted. "The political climate is shifting. Compliance, devastating as it would be, might be the safest long-term strategy." "Absolutely not," Victoria snapped. "We fight. We find her. We end this threat permanently." The meeting dissolved into shouting, the fragile alliance cracking under the weight of fear and indignation. No resolution was reached. The families left the Harrington estate divided, each retreating into their own strategy for survival. Over the following week, each made their choice. Jacob Dalton, hollowed by grief and terrified of imprisonment, began preparing his confession. He liquidated assets, gathered funds, and set about fulfilling Eleanor's demands. It would ruin him, but at least he would remain alive and outside a cell. Richard and Victoria Cavendish chose the opposite path. They hired investigators, bounty hunters, and men whose reputation suggested they could be paid to solve problems violently. They poured money into tracking Eleanor Thornton, determined to destroy her before the 30-day deadline arrived. The Harringtons found themselves split down the middle. Edmund leaned toward compliance, shaken by the collapse of the alliance and overwhelmed by the moral weight of what he'd done. Charles, despite his earlier speech, found himself torn. Compliance meant dismantling the legacy his family had built for generations. Defiance meant potential exposure and ruin. They argued quietly behind closed doors, neither able to fully commit to a path. Then the deadline crept close, and everything changed. Eleanor Thornton had not been idle. She had been watching their reactions, noting their choices, preparing her final move. On a cold February morning, 12 days before her deadline, Memphis awoke to shocking news. Jacob Dalton had hanged himself in his study. His wife discovered him at dawn, a rope around his neck, a note pinned to his chest. It read only, "I cannot live with what I've done. God forgive me for the lives I've destroyed in pursuit of profit." Dalton's suicide rocked Memphis society. He had been controversial but respected, and for a man like him to take his own life implied a disgrace more catastrophic than anyone had imagined. Rumors multiplied like wildfire. 2 days later, another blow struck. Richard Cavendish was found dead in a Nashville hotel. Official reports claimed heart failure, citing complications from his earlier burns, but those who saw the body whispered otherwise. There had been marks on his neck, bruising, signs of a struggle. The Nashville authorities, for reasons no one questioned too closely, closed the case quickly, with 2 men dead in 4 days, both tied to the Marcus Thornton scandal. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Edmund Harrington suddenly stood alone. Dalton gone, Cavendish gone. The alliance he'd hoped would protect him had become a graveyard. He was the only target left for Eleanor Thornton. He made his choice. Using intermediaries and coded messages, Edmund reached out, hoping Eleanor was monitoring the channels he used. He said he wished to negotiate, truly negotiate, to find terms that would satisfy her without utterly annihilating his family. To his surprise, a response came quickly. A meeting was arranged at a small church outside Memphis, empty during weekdays. Edmund arrived with Charles, both armed but praying they would not need their weapons. Eleanor Thornton waited for them in the stillness of the sanctuary. She was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed, carrying herself with a kind of severe dignity. Marcus stood beside her, and seeing him again stirred something conflicted in Edmund. Anger, shame, something like reluctant respect. "Mr. Harrington," Eleanor said without ceremony, "thank you for coming. I assume recent events have made you reconsider your stance." "Recent events," Edmund replied carefully, "have eliminated 2 of the 3 men you were targeting. Forgive my bluntness, but were you responsible for their deaths?" Eleanor's expression didn't shift. Jacob Dalton ended his own life rather than face what he had done. His guilt destroyed him far more thoroughly than anything I planned. As for Richard Cavendish, men who hire violent criminals sometimes discover those criminals have motives of their own. I do not mourn his passing. "And now only I remain," Edmund said. "Yes," she answered, "which brings us here. You wanted to negotiate, so negotiate." Edmund inhaled slowly. "Your demands will destroy my family. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for what happened to Marcus. I'm prepared to make financial amends. But I'm asking you to show mercy to my wife, my son, and the people who depend on us for employment. Let me bear the consequences without condemning innocent lives." "Innocent lives?" Eleanor's voice cut sharply through the air. "Tell me, Mr. Harrington, were you thinking about innocent lives when you purchased my son? When you kept him in your household, knowing something was wrong with the transaction? You asked for mercy now that you need it. Where was your mercy then?" "I had none," Edmund admitted. "I was wrong. I participated in something monstrous simply because it was legal and profitable, and because I didn't want to examine my own conscience. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to let the consequences fall on me alone." Eleanor studied him for a long time before finally speaking. "Your son argued for compliance during your meeting with the other families. He said accepting responsibility was the appropriate course. That was unexpected." Both Edmund and Eleanor turned their eyes to Charles. "It seemed like the right thing to say," he replied quietly. "But did you believe it? Or were you simply manipulating your father's guilt to steer his decision?" The question hit Charles with the force of a blow, because it was exactly what he had been doing. He had been trying to serve 2 masters, his conscience and his family's legacy, and failing both. "I don't know what I believe anymore," Charles admitted. "I grew up being taught that enslaved people were property, That business was morally neutral, that profit justified everything. But watching Marcus these past months, listening to him speak, seeing how intelligent he is, how human, has forced me to question everything I was raised to believe. I don't know if compliance is justice or just guilt wearing a mask. I only know what we did to him was wrong, and someone needs to admit that. Some of the hardness in Eleanor's expression eased. More honesty than I expected, she said. Very well. Here are my revised terms, Mr. Harrington. You will free your household slaves exactly as I demanded. You will give them documentation, funds, and resources to start new lives. You will resign from your bank positions, but I will not require a public confession regarding your purchase of Marcus. That is my concession to your plea for mercy. In return, the evidence I hold against you remains sealed. Your family can rebuild, slowly, over years, diminished, but not destroyed. What about Marcus? Charles asked. What becomes of him? Eleanor glanced at her son, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice held the weight of everything he had endured. I'm going north, he said. Boston eventually. My mother has contacts, people who can help me build a new identity and a life free from all this. I plan to study law, maybe even help others who end up trapped the way I was. I intend to use what happened to me to prevent it from happening to anyone else. That's admirable, Edmund said softly. Don't mistake my plans for forgiveness, Marcus replied, his tone sharpening. I'll never forgive what you did, what any of you did, but I can choose to use my experience for something constructive rather than allowing it to destroy me the way guilt destroyed Mr. Dalton. This isn't mercy toward you. It's survival for me. They stood in the quiet, empty sanctuary, the enormity of everything that had happened hovering between them. At last, Edmund nodded. I'll begin freeing the slaves tomorrow. You will have full compliance within the week. See that you do, Eleanor said, because if you fail, I still have my documentation. I can still destroy you. I am showing mercy, but only once. Do not make me regret it. They parted ways that afternoon. Eleanor and Marcus left Memphis, heading north toward new identities and uncertain futures. Edmund and Charles returned home to begin dismantling the foundations of their family's wealth, brick by painful brick. In the months that followed, the scandal surrounding the Harringtons was substantial but survivable. They freed the enslaved people, provided documentation and funds, and withdrew from their powerful social positions. Rumors of financial trouble swirled, but because the details remained vague, the gossip eventually diminished. Within 2 years, the Harrington name had lost its shine but remained intact. They became a family of respectable standing, no longer elite but not disgraced. The Daltons and the Cavendridges were not so fortunate. Jacob Dalton's suicide exposed financial irregularities that led creditors to seize everything. His family scattered in shame. Richard Cavendridge's death prompted investigations that uncovered a web of questionable business practices. Victoria tried to salvage what remained, but by 1856 she died destitute in New Orleans. As for Marcus Thornton, the historical record dissolves into speculation after 1852. Some accounts suggest a man fitting his description practiced law in Boston during the 1860s. Others claim he aided the Underground Railroad, though nothing is definitively documented. Eleanor Thornton died in Philadelphia in 1859, her obituary describing her as a widow devoted to charitable work on behalf of the formerly enslaved. The mystery that had consumed Memphis for those turbulent months faded over time, becoming just another forgotten shadow in a city filled with secrets. Yet for those who lived through it, the events of 1851 to 1852 remain permanently etched in memory, a reminder of how quickly power could crumble into vulnerability, how secrets could devour their keepers, and how the pursuit of profit without conscience often led only to destruction. The saga of Marcus Thornton and the 3 families who fought to possess him reveals something profound about pre-Civil War America. It was a world where human beings could be reduced to property, where beauty and intellect could be bought and sold, where powerful men felt entitled not only to labor but to the lives of others. The elaborate schemes, the staggering price, the competing ambitions, the mother's calculated revenge, all may seem extraordinary, but the reality beneath them was tragically common. Thousands of freeborn people were legally enslaved, their papers forged, their protests ignored, their lives erased by a system built to protect ownership over truth. The uniqueness of Marcus's story lies not in the injustice itself, but in the fact that any record of it survived at all. Most such stories vanish completely, their victims swallowed by history. That this one persisted, even in fragments, speaks to the determination of those involved to ensure the truth outlived the darkness that tried to silence it. Whether Eleanor Thornton's files still exist somewhere remains unknown. Perhaps they sit forgotten in an archive or buried in a private collection. But even if the physical documents have been lost, the pattern she reveals still echoes across American history. The intertwined forces of beauty, commerce, power, and conscience continue to shape the world we live in. We no longer trade in slaves, but we still wrestle with the same haunting questions. Who has value? Who is afforded dignity? What are we willing to sacrifice for profit or status? In that sense, the impossible mystery of the most extraordinary enslaved man ever sold in Memphis isn't merely about one young man in 1851. It's a mirror held up to all of us, reflecting the choices we make and the legacies we leave behind. What do you think of this story? Of the lengths people went to hide their secrets, and the courage it took for others to expose them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this hidden chapter of history compelling, make sure you're subscribed. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into forgotten scandals and suppressed truths. Share this video with someone who loves historical mysteries. These stories deserve to be remembered, and you can help ensure they never fade again. Until next time, keep questioning what you think you know about the past.